area we live in, it's just so expensive. And we
own Brandy,
yeah, my wife and I, yeah. And we decided to settle for a lower substandard home in order to remain in that congregation. But we couldn't even get one of those, so we had to move out of the area. So we've never experienced fear. And since I've come over to America, which is only a week now, I'm only in America a week, and I've heard some of the reports what's happening in the congregations around the country. I just can't believe that it's happening to a Christian community, a so-called Christian community. I know most of these things wouldn't happen at home because the brothers have a different outlook on life even. But I came over to America to see the elders in Gadsden because I didn't really, in my heart, believe that these things were actually so. I thought, things were exaggerated and things were in first hand or second hand and third hand. So I honestly believe that, even after 6 months of it, that it could be resolved within the organisation. I certainly prayed that it would be. So I come over to America with the RaymondFranz file that Martin was talking about, that he offered to Ewan Watt, the circuit overseer. And while Jack Barr was in Dublin, he told Martin that there was a few talking to him at the time. He says, well, you'd get the other side of the story if you went to Gadsden.
And spoke to the elders.
And spoke to the elders there. So I came down here and I rang Larry Johnson, one of the elders on that committee, and I said I'd like to meet with you in connection with the RaymondFranz case. I told him I was from Ireland and that I'd only got a couple of days and that I'd like to meet him tomorrow night after the meeting, which was a Tuesday night. So he said okay, that was alright. So after the meeting I met with Larry and with Theodis French. He was also on that committee. And what struck me was that, they were very young men. In my consideration, they were young men. I only reckon they'd be about, Theodis would be about 35 years of age. He just seemed young. And that struck me as unusual for two men on a committee to ruin a man's life, to be so young and seemingly so inexperienced. But I sat down with them and I said that the way that they handled the RaymondFranz affair had disturbed the brothers greatly in Ireland, and that I was over here and I was representing about 100 brothers. And that we had gone to our elders, and the elders just couldn't help us on this issue. So they brought in the circuit overseer and so on, and Martin has told the story what happened in Dublin. And I said that the branch sent to America, and Jack Barr came over, and it's on his authority that I am here now in Gadsden, that he said if I come to Gadsden that we'd get the other side of the story. So I asked him, could you help me to see what was the actual way we read of the case through. And they says, well, you've only got one side of the story, Larry Johnson says. He said, it was RaymondFranz's side of the story you've got. And it's obviously slanted. And this was a committee meeting, and it was private, and that we're not going to discuss it with anybody. So I said, but it's not private anymore. We all know about it in Ireland. And Uncle Denny didn't know that, I had this file which contained all the letters that RaymondFranz had written to the Gadsden elders, and all the letters they had written back to RaymondFranz, and even the letters that RaymondFranz had written to Brooklyn, looking for clarification to the September Watchtower on disassociated persons. So I took out the file and I says, we have all the information here about this case. And I think that surprised them, I really don't think they knew they expected that. I said, so what we're talking about now is not private anymore, which I said, unfortunately it has disturbed all the brothers in Ireland. I says, at least 3 congregations are very disturbed about it. And I says, I'd like to go through it with you. And he says, well, what's your questions? I says, well, the obvious haste with which the case is being handled. And I took out a letter and I showed, Larry, there's your signature, and I says, Theodis, there's your signature. So Theodis says, well, we're not going to go through this. This is a private and confidential matter. He says, and you're wasting my time, and you're wasting your time. And he got up and left the room.
After 6,000 miles travelling to the other side of the world.
I was shocked. Like, I've been in discussions with my own elders, and they've rang me up asking me to come and meet them. They'll try to help me with my answers. Now, I was actually shocked. So I had to shout out the door after him. I says, that's disgraceful behaviour for a Christian. I says, I come over here hoping to go back to my brothers back home and tell the branch that everything is not as we see it in the file, that we have a slanted view. But instead I've got to go back and tell them that you've walked out on me. Now I had to shout that out the door because he was gone. So he came back in the room then, and he says, we handled the case according to procedure. He says, everything we've done was according to procedure, and the Brooklyn know of it, and they've got this file. And if they're not going to discuss this with you, neither are we. I says, okay. I says, listen, I'm sorry for having to shout out after you. I says, I'm trying not to get upset, but I've only got a few days here. I says, this is affecting my family, and it's affecting the congregations. And I says, just sit down, because he still hadn't sat down. I says, just sit down, and I'll go through the papers. And you don't have to say anything, but just tell me if I have the whole story. So I didn't give them a chance to reply to that, so I started to go through the papers. I took out some of the papers that weren't directly involved with the case. So I took out, I says, one question that's disturbing the brothers is, why the obvious haste in this committee? Why did you rush through it with such haste? And they says, we didn't rush through it, we'd done everything. We get RaymondFranz, we bent over backwards is the words they used for RaymondFranz. I says, but RaymondFranz wrote to Brooklyn for clarification to that Watchtower article, because it put disassociated persons in the class of disfellowship persons, no matter what the reason they disassociated for. And he said that affected him in Gadsden and many others. So I took out the letter that he had sent to the committee, saying that he had written to Brooklyn and that he was waiting on a reply. And I took out the letter of their reply to that, and I read it to them. I just don't have it here. And they said in the letter, we acknowledge that you have written to Brooklyn about this matter, but we have decided to continue with the case. So I says, you didn't even wait. He says, well, Brooklyn didn't answer. And I says to him, you've dated this letter a couple of days after Ray sent you that one. You didn't even give them a chance to answer. So I don't think they really liked that. They knew then that I had a whole case. And they says, we're not discussing this. It's a private matter. It's confidential. We went by procedure. We went through the organisational procedure of things, which you should do. You should be leaving this to your elders. I says, we've left it to our elders. The elders brought in the branch and circuit overseer. They brought in brothers from Brooklyn, and they've not been able to help us. So I'm here now asking you to help us, please. And I said to him, really, I didn't come over here to create trouble. I came over here to hoping that these letters are not all that there is to the case. And they said, well, you've got all the letters, they says. And if Brooklyn isn't going to discuss it, we're not going to discuss it again. I says, listen, Jesus would leave the flock, he said, just to go after one sheep. I says, even if we have to step outside of procedure, just to help the brothers in Ireland, wouldn't it be worth it if we helped one or two? They says, listen, any John Doe who goes off for the circuit overseer's wife, we're not going to go up into the congregation and tell them about it. He says, and we're not going to go through this because someone in Ireland has a question on it. I says, but it's not just someone in Ireland. I says, it's over 100 brothers who I'm representing here today. Because there's over 100 brothers asking the particular questions, but I'm sure there's hundreds more who want them answered. And I says, it's not a private matter. I've got the file here in front of me. Well, you've got the file, that's all there is to it. You don't need any explanation for it. He says, if you're losing your faith, and if the brothers in Ireland hadn't been loyal over this issue, well, they haven't got much faith to talk about. I says to him, I was shocked. I've never experienced anything like it.
I'd like to put them down in County Cork for a couple of weeks and see how strong their faith would be.
Yeah. But I says to them, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe that you're saying this to me. I've really come over here looking for your help, and you're turning me away. And they says, we're not discussing it any further with you. There's no point. You have the file, and that's all there is. And that was it. They just wouldn't go through it with me. And I says, well, I'm really sorry it's come down to this, because now I know. I've come down myself and I've seen it for myself, that if you're not going to go through it with me, I says, there must be something to hide. I says, if you're hiding something, all you've got to do is just sit there and I'll go through the papers and you just tell me if there's something missing, and that'll satisfy me. But I just wouldn't even do it. So that was it. So since then, there's another elder in that who was associated with that congregation who's rang up and he wants to see us tomorrow. So I'm going to go and see him tomorrow. And he said that the way they handled it was wrong, that they shouldn't have handled it in that way. So I'd rather not give that elder's name as yet, because we'll see what happens after tomorrow. But I must say, I have never been so shocked. Up to now, I've hoped that the organisation was okay. I could see there was certain things wrong, but I couldn't see any other way as being better. I could see that there was questions needing answering, and I myself was doing my own research and study, which I think all of us should, because if we resolve it ourselves, or if we find out the answers and questions, well then we'll be better people for it. But I think now that there's no avenue that we can hope to go to get these questions resolved. So I really am personally finished with the organisational procedure of things. Those men have proven to me that the community that we associate with is not as Christian as we'd like to think it. So that's where I am.
This is a little scrap of paper that Brother Martin had to get out of the circuit overseer, E.G. Watt. It took him 3.5 hours just to get this little scrap of paper, 3 hours just to get him to write it out, and another half hour just to get a signature on it. It's kind of interesting that he didn't want to put anything in writing. It kind of makes us rather suspicious of anyone that doesn't want to put anything on paper.